Hey friends, welcome back to my channel. Today we are going to be talking about what I learned and what really are the main differences as my experience working in a small non-for-profit startup to a big corporate company. I want to talk to you about the pros and cons of each and what is best for you. Before we get into it though, make sure to hit that subscribe button for more tech and coding related videos. As always, shout out to some of these subscribers here. You all are amazing. Thank you. I feel like every video I go on about how wonderful you are, so I'll just keep it at that for this video. Okay, let's get started. I'm sure everyone who is looking, especially in the tech industry, or looking for a new job or to break in, has had this dilemma. Should I work for a big corporate company or should I work for a startup? There are so many pros and cons to both that it can be kind of overwhelming to choose what is best for you, especially if you've only worked in one or the other or none at all. And these are big decisions you have to make. You have to take into account the finances, the work-life balance, how your career will progress. Is there enough learning opportunities? There's so much. Are you just another number? Like, there's so much to take into consideration, and I can attest to this as I've been there firsthand, and I remember those feelings of feeling like, what is right for me? You know, it's a lot, it's overwhelming. And I want to talk to you about my experience having worked at a very small startup to a big tech company. The first thing I want to highlight is what is expected of you will differentiate between if it is a startup versus a big company. When I worked at a startup, it was, you do your job, what is required, but you also have to do so much more than that, which is a wonderful thing and sometimes not a wonderful thing. For example, I was a developer at the startup I was working at, but if there was graphic design needed, because I had a graphic design background, I would pitch in. If there was marketing needed or you needed to go raise money for the startup, anything, you were involved in the entire process. This was a really great thing in the sense that it made me really well-rounded and understand how a lot of the different parts of a company work. From accounting, no, I did not do accounting, but I sat next to the accountant, to QA, to marketing, to the graphic design part of it. I really got to touch a lot of different aspects because I was in a small startup. As well, with a small startup, I actually started in QA, and that's how I got my first start in development. I was at a startup, and I knew startups would be more open typically to switching and going into different roles. So I thought if I go start in QA, there's a high probability that over time I can pick up and start being a developer. And that's actually what I did. So startups definitely typically offer more leeway as to your career path and switching different roles, because they have the flexibility when they are so small that you can kind of be agile and jump around. The other side of the coin is the corporate or big company side. And when you are in a specific role at a bigger company, it is more likely, from my experience anyways, that you will be doing that exact role. Why is this a good thing though? There's a positive to this as well, because you are doing your role, you're doing what you're hired, and you can really focus on growing in that specific skill set. So now the company I am at, IBM, the big tech company I'm at, I am a developer, but I also focus on my growth with development skills. I can take different coding courses. All my attention, 9 to 5, is around my, obviously building products, etc., but it's also around growing my skills, bettering myself as a developer. So it's really great in the sense that you get those opportunities to really hone in on growing what you were hired to do versus a startup where there's going to be times where you get pulled away from your development or whatever work you're doing to do something else just because they need the people. Okay, now let's talk about professional development. Oh, professional development, where to begin? I think I sigh when I say this because everyone has such different experiences with professional development, especially in startups, I find. And I'm just going to speak about my own professional development experience with startups. It was really great in the sense that I was, as I mentioned, able to switch roles from QA to developer. There was a lot of opportunities to touch different parts of the business and get really involved. What I found was lacking though with a startup was there wasn't the structure in place that allowed me to have time to get certificates for development or really continue on my career path, like the growth of my career path, I should say. Because it's a startup, everything is a bit more, I don't know if this is the right term, but a bit more janky, meaning that there isn't a structure in place. So I didn't really learn proper frameworks as far as, MVC or different kind of how to build out different, how to structure the code properly or the right tools to use. It was kind of a free-for-all, like whatever you wanted to use, whatever library you wanted to download, you could just kind of go for it. And this was great because I got to try out a ton of different things, but it wasn't great that there was really no structure and we all kind of were just going day by day. And I'm not saying all startups are like that, but that is definitely something that a lot of startups can have, is more you're just going day by day, figuring it out as you go, which is really exciting, but you're not going to learn necessarily the structures and frameworks that are put in place when you leave that startup. And for me, when I was in the startup and I didn't have that experience going to a big company, it was like a wall hit me, or I hit the wall. I ran into a wall because I didn't know they were using all these technical terms. Even things like agile we didn't really do, or stand-ups at the startup we didn't do. And these were all new things to me. So I went to this big company and I felt like I had this extra step or extra curve or extra learning curve to do on top of learning my actual role, because I didn't have experience at the startup that would teach me how to do these things. So not saying all startups are like that, but I definitely think a lot of startups, they have to be just more day by day, taking it as it comes. And then things like setting up proper processes are just not there because they don't have the time. And then we go to a big company. So of course, a big company has a ton of different processes and regulations and different kind of frameworks to follow, which is amazing because you learn oftentimes what is most in demand, what are these kind of processes. When I say processes, I'm talking everything from, how to structure out your code, different processes, to how the workflow works as far as like, okay, the designer talks to the business team, designs something, hands it to, business analyst. Like all these steps in place in corporate versus a startup are there for a reason. And it's great, but it also too means things move at a bit of a slower pace, typically. And it also means that you're exposed to one specific kind of process. So when you leave that company, you are at risk as well that maybe you haven't kept up to date with the latest tech trends or anything like that, and you feel a little bit behind. So both really kind of the same pros and cons. It's just the reality of being in the tech industry because things are changing so rapidly. And I don't think it's something to worry about, but more so just highlighting that is kind of the facts. Okay, now let's talk about growth in career. I found for my experience at a startup, I didn't have that much room for growth in my career. I was working with people who were on the same level as me, maybe a bit more senior, and it went from that to I was sitting across from the CTO and diagonally from the CEO, which is cool because you get to be exposed to a lot of awesome, really brilliant people. But on the other hand, it's like I had no one to really look up to. I didn't have, these really senior managers with this wonderful career path that I hope to reflect or mirror. It was more so, okay, well, where do I go from here? Get promoted to senior developer and then manager. But it's like there really wasn't that middle ground of senior people. It was junior people that the startup could hire and then very senior people. And that really stunted my career growth because I had no one to look up to or to mentor me, and I just felt kind of like, well, this is it. Whereas a big company now, I feel like I have the mentorship and support available to really see what my career could be like if I stay on this path, or go this way if I want to go DevOps, or maybe I want to go solutions architect. And it just makes like the possibilities feel much more real as far as that I can grow into this really wonderful technical career by seeing other people do it. Now, I'm sure if you are at a startup and watching this, you might be like, Tiff, you're completely wrong. That's not my experience. And I totally respect that. This is just my experience. And I think, once again, every startup and every big company is so different. But I think it's important to talk about our experiences as well. And that was just mine at that startup. I didn't feel as though I could see myself growing with it. However, there are startups that end up being amazing and just turn into these huge companies where if you stay with them, you end up being like a millionaire, or maybe not millionaire, but maybe, you never know. Like, for example, Shopify. I had a friend who was an engineer at Shopify. She was, I think, one of the first 40 engineers hired, and she was a software engineer, and she left. When she left the company, it was at like, they were in the hundreds of people, and she left with a lot of money in her pocket because of that. So there are definitely times where you stick with the startup and it turns out to be something incredible. That just wasn't my experience, and that's another risk you will take working for a startup. Now let's talk about salary and work-life balance. Obviously, working for a big company has a much more cushier paycheck than a startup does. That's just kind of a given, especially if you work at a company, a FANG company, in the tech industry. You are going to have really nice paychecks versus if you are working at a startup. With work hours and work-life balance, for me, I have found that working at a big company provides much more work-life balance because there's much more structure in place as to what is allowed and what's not allowed. You can't work, 20 hours a day, every day. Like at a startup, a lot of times there's that pressure to do so. I mean, there is that pressure too at a corporation if you see others doing it and you want to get a promotion or different things like that, but it's much more acceptable to have a work-life balance, I find, working for a big company than it had been at a startup. Because startup, we're trying to build something amazing, something super big. Same like at a big company, but startups are at a much quicker pace and they need to get this out there to survive, to pay us, to pay all of their employees. So they need us to work as hard and as long as possible. I think overall, salary and work-life balance, I can't even really compare the two. My experience has been definitely the corporate side of things, big company side of things, has been much more amazing for both salary and work-life balance. Even the benefits that a big company offers, gyms, free food. I love free food. What else? Therapy. What else is there? Like everything, just everything you can think of, they offer, whereas startups have none of that. And of course you go into the company knowing that. So if you're at a startup, it's usually because you really believe in what they're doing and want to be a part of something great. You're not going there for the free food and salary. There are a lot of pros and cons to both, and I don't want to sway you either way. I wanted to make this video more so just to tell you from my experience. And as I mentioned, every startup, every big company is so different and unique, and it really depends on your situation. I think if you find a startup that you are really passionate about and can see changing the world or doing really good, then that's one thing. But if you're just going to a startup to go to a startup, I'd really question if it's something that is going to work for you in the long run. That being said, if you're looking to maybe break into a new role, I think startups are also a really great way to go because typically they are much more flexible with that. I hope it helps you though, kind of give you insight into the difference between the startup and corporation. And I would love to hear your personal experiences as well. Do you disagree or agree with what I'm saying between startups and big companies? Let me know in the comments. I'm open to feedback. I'm open to both. Before we go though, make sure to hit that subscribe button for more tech and coding related videos. Give this video a thumbs up and I will see you all soon. Thanks everyone.